This is the Crucial Talks podcast with your host, Mike Saddam.
Hello, and welcome back to the Crucial Talks podcast. I'm your host, Mike Saddam. If you get a chance, I'd really appreciate it if you could please subscribe to the podcast and review it. So just click the subscribe button and give it a 5-star rating. It really helps. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, please feel free to visit www.crucialtalks.com and reach out to me via email, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. Now, I've also added something new to the website. Under the podcast tab, I have added a link to each author's book that I interview. So what's cool about that is you get to listen to them talk, then you can just click on that little link and get their book. And today's episode is going to be no different because today I'm talking to Dan Oblinger, and he is the author of Life or Death Listening, a hostage negotiator's how-to guide to mastering the essential communication skill. Now, this is about listening, and it's coming from somebody who has been there and done it, which is why I think it's pretty cool we get to talk to him, because you're not just learning from a book, you're actually learning from a guy that was in the trenches doing this stuff. So you're not just getting theory, but you're getting practice. Now, not only does Dan's work in communication fit with what we talk about here on the podcast, but he's also filled a bunch of different roles like hostage negotiator, undercover investigator, chicken rancher, drug recognition expert, human resources consultant, ditch digger, landlord, grocery bagger. I mean, the list goes on. And it fits in line with the discussions we've had in the past about how the identities we adopt allow us to make sense of what is happening around us and lets us develop the behaviors we need to be successful in those roles that we play. Now, today, I think we're going to focus on the role of listener and the behaviors and techniques and tactics that go with that role. Because there's two sides to communication. One is the sender, and the other is the receiver, and they're both so important. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dan Oblinger. How are you doing today, Dan?
I am blessed, Mike, and thank you for having me on your wonderful podcast.
No, I think it's going to be great. I'm kind of thumbing through your book here. I think it's going to be really fascinating. I plan to learn a few things from you. But before we do all that, before we get into the episode, can you tell us a little bit about you and the journey you took to get to this point today where you actually wrote a book, you're a speaker, you're a corporate trainer? I'd love to hear how you got to this point.
It's a journey. I mean, everybody has an origin story. I love how, the comic book movies are really popular right now, and origin stories are critical to understand the character. And I think that's the same thing for real people without superpowers. And so it's kind of a tongue-in-cheek intro and bio to talk about all those different jobs and roles that I've had. And that is kind of my path to where I've been. Every one of those little jobs, from the first job I had as like a small town diner cook and prep, all the way up to being a hostage negotiator and running a hostage negotiation team for a large major 50 city. Every stop along the way was critical. Every stop along the way, I picked up something that I use now. And I hope everybody can reflect upon their journey and realize all those stops along the way, they added up to something that's amazing. So the key takeaway for me, maybe, like you said, I really like what you said, actually, to focus on the role of listener, because although I don't say that, although I'm not, I don't have a vest at home that says professional listener, although that would be a better way to describe what a hostage negotiator does. It's just not as cool. Hopefully you're a listener in all those roles. Even working in the back room of a small diner in a small town, listening is critical. Being a husband, being a father, listening is critical. Being a police officer, listening is actually life or death, as my book says. And being on a podcast or running a podcast, listening is what adds the value to the product. And so my journey has been very eclectic, but the key thread throughout has been a journey also of discovery of the listening skill set. And that's where I'm at now.
Well, and I think it's pretty cool to be talking to you. And I love everything you said, because people that listen to this podcast have heard it all before, which is we all have these different stories, like you said, and we all take these different journeys. But what's kind of neat about what you've done and what other people have done, even though they may not have recognized it and not been as self-aware of you as you have been, is the fact that everything we do, it doesn't really seem like everything we've done in life. From, I started working at a garage when I was in high school, and I kind of followed a similar path into public service like you have, and kind of blended education and knowledge and all this stuff into something that, just like you're trying to help people. That's kind of where I'm at now too, right? We're I don't know if you're still active like I am, but we have these kind of day jobs, and then on the side, what we're trying to do is take all of that information that we've gained over the years and help people, but not just help people in the careers we have kind of been embedded in for decades, but really to help people all throughout the country in different roles that they play in corporations, in small businesses, everything they do, because the people I've got to talk to on this podcast have been like you. They've come from such a varied background, but what we've been able to talk about is able to help a lot of people. And I think that's kind of what you're doing now with your skill set on listening and trying to help people understand not only the value, but how to do it, and then what to do with that information once you hear it. Is that kind of what you're doing now?
Yeah. And this is the thing is we all have jobs. You got your job, and some people are blessed, like I think you have been, and I have been. I've had a rich career of experience and self-knowledge, and at the same time been able to support a large family on the salary. I mean, I get paid very fairly, for that career. But at the same time, there was something else inside of me. There was a calling that was not being fulfilled just with my public service. My father actually, I think, helped me discover that. He was a commercial contractor and did a lot of horizontal, so built a lot of buildings. And he's like, what you've experienced, in police work, and especially at the time I was doing a lot of drug investigations and then also hostage negotiation. He's like, what you know about those hazards and those skills, people would pay for that in the private sector. And I didn't really believe him, but I did start, dip my toe in the pool, as Mr. Pope would say, and then I drank deep. And that's where I'm at now with my side hustle, which I think everybody has these days, is yes, translating what I know in my life of service into the language of the private sector, but also for families, so that they can use those skills and experiences that I've earned over a couple of decades of service to do amazing things in their families, in their communities, and even in their companies.
And that's where I think we are completely aligned in that, because I've talked to people like gas and petroleum, geothermal power plants, all these different people I never thought I'd ever get to talk to, because after so many years in public service training in-house and that sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
To think that we would be able to talk to people that are, that are in a complete, like I know nothing about geothermal power plants, right? Like I know nothing about gas and petroleum except I got to put it in my car. But being able to talk to people and seeing that these skill sets translate in a way that can help people, I think is such a huge benefit to what you're doing. And so with that being said, when we're talking about listening, how are you helping these corporations? How are you helping people in communities and families and companies do better with respect to how people communicate? What are you doing, and what are some of the techniques you talk about in your book and in your speaking and consulting?
What a great question. So are you ready for the answer? I'm going to answer your question. I'm going to kind of segue into why the book is entitled the way it is. And I'm going to sell whoever's listening to your podcast all over the world on listening as the skill, not just a skill, the skill. This is what I've discovered is you can put me in a room with anybody, one person or 100 people, any job, any walk of life, any ethnicity, any race, language could be problematic. I'm going to need a translator, but I know that those people, whatever they do, they could do it with greater value and greater personal purpose if they listened more authentically while they did it. Because listening is the foundation of accomplishing work with other people, no matter what. And listening is, of all the skills, the one that I think is most, it's the highest stake skill. If you do it well, people live. If I'm a hostage negotiator, right? If I don't listen well as a negotiator, people die. But what I've found, and this is the kind of the big thrust of the book, and in my keynotes, I'm going to give it away. This is a really important point in the keynote, is that even for you, if you're not a hostage negotiator, if you're a husband or a wife, a father or a mother, or just a great uncle or aunt, if you are a CEO or you're a janitor, if you listen well, then the relationships that you have with people thrive. They live, right? The company is nothing more than the sum total of all those different relationships, employee to employer, peer to peer within the team, salesman to client, saleswoman to client or prospect, all of those different relationships. If you add authentic listening to it, they thrive, and the company, is propelled forward, right? It lives. But by the same token, if your culture of your organization does not emphasize listening, and in fact, if you have a bunch of poor listeners, or really, this is more likely unintentional listeners that just let it happen, then over time, relationships suffer and organizations suffer. If you take listening out of a family, the family drifts apart. If you take listening out of a sales relationship, it stops, it ends. And over time, our organizations or thrive from the qualitative listening that goes on. So listening truly is life or death. And that's the purpose of my book, and the purpose of my speaking, and really, my private sector work, is to convince people of that listening is the foundational skill for every other skill you do. Listening adds value to that. So that's where I'm at, Mike, is I am a salesman for listening.
Well, and that's why I think it's extremely important that people realize that it doesn't matter what role they're playing. It doesn't matter, like you said, if they're the CEO or the janitor. Listening is huge, because communication is how we actually build these social bonds, and it's how we build companies, it's how we build society. So if communication is so important to building those things and constructing these stories with each other that bring us to action, we can't just say that communication is single directional. We have to realize that listening is a huge part of that, because that's the way we transfer information. If we're not listening, then we're either not hearing the story, which means we're not engaged, which means we're not making the decisions based on what the true beliefs are of that group, whether it's a family or a community or corporation. So what kind of things can we do to kind of help us listen better? Because I think a lot of people out there are like me, which is they're thinking right now, yeah, I could probably improve how I listen, or what I listen to, or really what I liked what you said about listening authentically. What can we do to be better listeners?
Well, that's it. That's it right there. That's the $1 million question, right? So as hostage negotiators, we know that there's 8 active listening skills, and that if you can master not just each of those 8, although that is possible, but really the 8 that work as a system. So if you can master this overarching skill set of active listening and all the different ways that you can apply it to situations, then you are, ipso facto, you're a master listener. And I can put you in any situation. It could be a criminal interview. It could be negotiating with a jumper on top of a building. It could be negotiating a contract in a boardroom. It could be parenting children. But if you're a master listener, you really are a master communicator. There's interesting situations as a corporate trainer and as a corporate consultant. I frequently get told about bad listeners, whether it's somebody's boss or manager, whether it's the CEO setting up a coaching session for an employee saying, yeah, they're just not a good communicator. It's typically what they say. And I often think that I think some people might get in their head, well, he must not be able to, form his thoughts into words and speak. And that's typically not the case. Usually they can speak very well. It's that they don't listen. I think listening is the greater portion of communications, because you ought to be doing it a lot more than speaking if you want to learn. Nobody learns anything by speaking. We learn through listening. We acquire knowledge through listening. We discover where people are at in those individual journeys when we listen to their story. And then I can lead them. If I know where they're at and I know where they want to go, I can lead that person. And the only way to find that out is by really listening to them, and listening in a culture and an environment where they truly believe that I want the truth, and that I'm going to handle that truth when it's given to me as a good listener, with some discretion and appropriately. And so that's all of that is baked into listening, and it really begins with those 8 active listening skills. So that's what my book's about. And when I have a client that's willing to invest the time, that's what the training's about.
Well, and so we're talking a lot about listening, right? Like listening to me, I know it when I see it.
We're talking about listening, Mike, which is a little ironic, but there it is.
But so that's my question then is, what is listening? I mean, I get the science and the biology behind it on how it happens. And how
everybody gets that. That's easy. Yeah, that's easy, right?
But what about these non-tangibles? What is listening as a human attribute, as a human skill? What is it exactly that we're trying to accomplish when we're talking about listening? Because hearing is like the sound waves come in, they hit your eardrums, all this stuff happens, it gets to your brain as a signal, and then your brain processes that. But that's really not listening, right? So
it's not. And it's not good enough either. It's not good. If you're married, you know it's not good enough. You've been probably busted on this before, right? So what I say in my trainings is there is this thing called hearing. And in fact, there's this thing that's almost like hearing. It's maybe a little better than hearing, but it's consumption. So all these digital devices we have, like we're being trained to consume digital media and communications media. And like you said, it's a two-way street. And what we're being trained to think is that it's not a two-way street. We just receive it. And hopefully it's for our, usually in those cases, it's for our entertainment, right? Are you pleased? Is it pleasurable? And unfortunately, a lot of times, really high level of listening is not pleasurable. It's tough. So this is where I'm at. And this is the dangerous thing talking to me, is that my educational background is actually philosophy. I studied to be a Roman Catholic priest before I became a police officer. So I think about this stuff all the time, like when I'm on the phone with people as a negotiator, or when I'm in the streets with, when I was a police officer on the street. And this is what I discovered, to answer your question directly. There are two goals when you listen. There's the first goal, which I think most people understand. That's to be attentive, like to give people your attention. This is how a lot of people decide if you're listening to them well or not, if you're being authentic with them and being real with them or not. And that is, am I looking at you while you talk to me? Am I orienting my body towards you so that my ears are pointed at you so I can hear you, right? Am I engaged in other activities, which is a clear signal to people that you're not listening? Or are you solely focused, mind, body, and soul on the person who is giving you their story at that moment? So that's attentiveness, and that's really important. It's the first thing we do. But then there's the second thing, and this is where a lot of people, I think, fail. Because the storyteller, the person we're trying to listen to, they pick up on this just as well. And that is, okay, I'm attentive, but am I responding appropriately? And this is where we directly address what you've mentioned, that it's a two-way street. So if I just was attentive with you and gave you my full attention, I'm looking at you, I have an appropriate body posture, I'm smiling warmly, and you tell me your story, and at the end, I'm like, all right then, and I get up and I leave, right? Or I never ask you any questions, or I don't say anything at all, I just stare at you, then nobody's going to feel listened to. And in fact, that's not listening. Listening is an activity. It is something that we engage in, and we meet people where they're at. We ask deep questions. That's one of the active listening techniques, is open-ended questions, right? So we're attentive, that's one, but then we have to respond appropriately. And that is diving into the story, showing that we're interested by how we respond, both non-verbally, but also by asking great questions and offering insights about their story. And that's the greater part of active listening to me.
Well, and in your book, and I love this little line you put in here, you actually said that, and I'm going to quote out of the book, that listening is a function of the mind and soul, not the ears, which I think is awesome, because what we've talked about on this podcast all the time, like one of the core tenets of why you fit so well with this podcast, is the fact that people are social storytellers, that we're the same biologically and cognitively that we always have been since we were in tribes, and we just have a faster means of doing all that with.
None of that's changed.
Exactly. That's why I love. Well, and that's why I love what you said, because you're saying it's a function of the mind and soul, which basically tells me that, hey, you understand that as social storytellers, we make decisions based on emotion. And so by listening the way you're talking about, making it an active, engaged process, that you're engaging the mind and soul, which means what you're trying to do is tap into that emotional decision-making, because it's got to be part. It just can't be the frosting, right? It can't just be glossing over and you're picking up keywords here and there. It's actually got to be an activity that impacts what you're going to do next.
You have to, it's a commitment. It is a commitment that you reaffirm the commitment every time they speak. And I think maybe this is illustrative. So as a crisis or hostage negotiator, I'm asked to get on the phone with people that, at least on first blush, they are diametrically opposed to me, to what I stand for, right down to what I'm wearing, the uniform of that police department that we serve or whatever. And they have their own goals that, again, at first appearance, are completely opposed to the goals of myself and my team, which is negotiated surrender. They're going to prison or they're going to the hospital, right? One or the other. Very rarely that we would go meet them and then they go back in their house and it's Miller time, we all go home. So I'm selling them on that. And for most people, maybe the circumstances are exotic, but how many times in your life do you run up against somebody and you have a conflict with them in communications, and they want something that you don't want them to have, or you want something that they are preventing you from acquiring? And this is a common experience in the corporate world. This is a common experience in families when we're deciding what to do as a family, right? And the difference maybe between people that aren't trained and experienced in a crisis negotiator, the people on my team, is we're like, hold my beer. Like, these are my people, difficult people that are in conflict with me. This is my tribe. And the reason why is, and this is to answer your question, is because everybody has that story. That's what motivates a crisis negotiator, and what creates our belief that we can succeed and we can negotiate a surrender, is that if I listen to this person's story, probably nobody else has for a very long time. And that will give me an incredible amount of influence over them, because in order to share that story all the way, they're going to trust me. And this is what we know. I mean, that's the glide path for a crisis negotiator: to take chaos and turn it into a negotiated surrender, is merely listening to that story. And what motivates that process is this firm belief based on experience that everybody's got one. We're social storytellers. Like, even the most broken people in society, they have this story of self, and that includes where they've been and where they're at, and also where they hope to be. And everybody's got that. Like, even sociopaths have that. And so that motivates us as crisis negotiators to discover that with them, and in the process become influential.
Well, and I love what you said, because what I've talked about on the podcast a lot is the fact that people don't have to be where they are. We can get people to a different place. You can get yourself to a different place by telling yourself the right story. And the fact that you're using that kind of same language, that you understand that everybody has a story about where they are, a story about where they're in the present, where they are, but really a story about where they hope to be. And by listening, you can tap into that. But what I'd like to hit on really quick, because you kind of glossed over it, and I think it can help people, is the fact that when you are listening per your job, meaning you're out there as a hostage negotiator and you're trying to bring a resolution to an activity, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? I mean, there's radios going, there's people walking around, there might be press involved. Well, so here's the deal. Well, it is chaos, and I'm not going to ask you about the hostage negotiator take on that, but I think that what you can offer people is the fact that today, right now, I might be sitting in my office. I'm not negotiating with somebody that took hostages or is holding, a family member in the building with him. You're trying to get them out. But look at all these devices we have and all the apps. And, you go from YouTube to Facebook to LinkedIn to what's going on Twitter to what's on TV to what music you're listening to, all on our phones. And so if we're talking about being attentive and we're talking about providing an appropriate response from your skill set, from your experience as a hostage negotiator dealing with chaos, what can you tell us to help us deal with all of that stuff that is going on around us every single day, from the kids in junior high to, a 75-year-old at a nursing home that has a phone? I mean, there's so much going on. How do we filter through all that so we can be an active listener?
Look, I've chased dope for years, from meth to heroin to pills to, you name it. And I'm convinced that digital media is every bit as addictive as those substances. And the proof's already in the pudding, but it's going to be borne out over these next 2 generations that are entering the workforce. So certainly millennials, of which I am on the leading edge, but Generation Z coming in now, we're seeing this. If you're not, your eyes are closed. And that is, I was raised with a foot in each canoe, right? I learned to adopt early digital media, but my brother, who was born 15 years after me, he grew up with it and never knew anything differently. And so now the generation after him, you can imagine the level of immersion that they have in digital and social media. And this is the thing, is that it trains your brain to be a poor listener. I'm convinced of it. I mean, liking somebody's post is not engaging them to discover more deeply who they are and where they want to be, right? Sharing and causing things to go viral does not increase the level of dialogue and true human interaction. And honestly, we're the most connected civilization in the history of civilizations, and we are also now the saddest and loneliest civilizations, even though we have the most people and the most ways to connect with them and communicate with them. And I think I'm preaching to the choir, Mike. Am I right?
You are, and that's what I'm getting at is then
we need
what do
listening.
But how do we do that, right? Like, how do we get people, what skills are we training people with so that when they have these devices where you are connected 24/7, but that doesn't mean that connection is to the emotionally deep level that we need as social beings? What do you do? I mean, is it as simple as putting it away?
Right. I think the first and foremost thing, and this is easier said than done, is you have to have comprehensive rules about how you use digital media, and whether that is limiting the time that you use it in a given day, limiting the avenues that you use it for, deciding that there's 1 or 2 ways that I connect with the people that are really important in my life, and I'm just going to stick to those, because there's certainly both quantity and quality issues with how we interact with the digital environment. We have to create good rules for use, just like anything that's addictive. Like drinking alcohol, you have to set good rules for how you consume those beverages so that you won't get into trouble physiologically and also legally, right? Same thing with digital media. It's addictive. We want those likes and shares, so we have to be careful how often we use it and how we use it. I think we have to set good rules, and we have to have good people in our life that we communicate with and listen to that can help us by holding us accountable. And then we have to replace that activity and that outlet, that need that we have to interact with people. We have to replace it with something that's better for us. And I think that is seeking out listening opportunities with real live human beings that are right here in our house, in our offices, right, in our cars as we drive. And we have to engage those people in authentic, non-digital listening opportunities. And part of that's just that motivation you and I've already talked about, that is life or death. Like my relationship right now will be made more vital if I listen to my wife, right? Instead of getting on Facebook and looking at whatever, talking to my children and listening to them and how their day went instead of getting on LinkedIn, right? So we have to take those opportunities, and we have to be skillful and artful about how we do that. And that's where those 8 active listening skills come in. And we have to make sure that this is like an ongoing process. Like we're constantly looking for those opportunities and checking up on people and their stories. And that's just, there's nothing complex about it. There's no magic bullet. It's setting aside the digital media, using it for what it's good for. There's a good purpose for it, but understanding that real life people are more important.
Well, and I think that's the biggest point you're making, is that it has to be a deeper level of communication. And this is what I find. I mean, I'm totally fascinated by this conversation. I know we're probably getting a little off the rails from your book content, but what I love about the conversation we're having is the fact that I'm in California, you are in Kansas, and it feels like our communication is that kind of deeper level. So we're using a digital tool, but the basics behind it, the theory behind it, the foundation behind it is still considering these 2 goals of listening, which is being attentive and providing an appropriate response, that deeper level emotional connection.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's the last bit. And it's kind of the explanation for, how could it be, Mike, that we have all these different ways to communicate? We have these amazing technological tools, right? We have more people than ever that have access to them. And that's good. That's an amazing gift that we have, is that some of the poorest people in our communities have access to the internet and have a cell phone, right? They can summon help and they can communicate with loved ones. They're totally connected. But then there's this conundrum, like they're also sad and lonely. And I think the answer is because we so often in our communication, and particularly in digital social media, we ignore emotions. And that's the thing. So if you're a master listener, then you understand that emotions are everything, that emotions are opportunities, that emotions, without emotions, the story will make no sense. That story of self, the origin, the current status, and where they want to be, if you remove the emotion from it and you ignore it as you listen, you'll never understand people. Because we are social storytellers and we're also emotional beings. Like, we are emotional creatures, and we cannot separate that from our story. And you shouldn't even try it, because it's what makes us who we are. It's an amazing and a beautiful thing about human beings. It's also why we're awful. It's awful. It's also why I have a job as a hostage negotiator, and I had a long career in law enforcement, is because people would get emotional and not manage those well. But that presents the opportunity to help them. And that also is a really critical and core, goal, you would say, for listening well, is to get to the emotions of the story and understand those just as much as what they're trying to tell us.
Well, exactly, because I really think and now people listening to this podcast they're from all over the world. They have all kinds of jobs. There are Instagram influencers and salespeople. Mm-hmm. There are people that only have a digital profile, really, that are listening to this. So really what I'm trying to get to with you is something that they can understand, which is, we're talking about these emotional level connections, but what I want people to really understand is the fact that it doesn't mean you have to now all of a sudden become a door-to-door salesman when you're really a B2C or B2B provider and you're digital only. But you may have a digital only presence, but these theories, these proven techniques, these proven indicators of active listening work in the social domain, because you're not just going for 10,000 thumbs up on Facebook. That really doesn't, that doesn't convert for a salesperson. That doesn't mean that converts to sales. You're looking for the deeper vertical connections, right? You're not just looking for the likes, you're looking for a deeper
sort of conversation. So all these platforms, you can throw out your content, your marketing content, and please do. Don't stop doing that, because you listen to this podcast with Dan Oblinger and then blame me later when your sales tank, because that's an important part of it. But imagine, like you said, on conversions, imagine finding 5 people, qualified people, like you've done because that's the other thing, is it's data driven. So you've got good data, but you find those 5 people and then you start conversations with them offline, like call them at their office, or, through the messaging platform within that site, and start a qualified conversation with them. And ask them deep questions. That's where the active listening skills, right? Asking questions that demand answers, but in a way that's really inviting. You ask those kind of questions to get a conversation started. All of a sudden you have a friend, and not just a friend, right? You have somebody that's interested in you and what you're selling. And you do that every day consistently, just start like 5 conversations, then you're going to convert those sales, right? And then added to that, I would make one more recommendation, because we're talking about something that's addictive and it's digital media. Find at least a half an hour. I would actually say, hey, be ambitious and find a whole hour of your life in this 24-hour cycle we call a day, and remove social media and digital media and all the sources of digital media from your life for that 1 hour. Take a fast. Fasting's critical for human beings, right? So intentionally say, between this time, this hour and this hour, I am not going to be on any digital devices. I'm not going to be in the presence of something where I could be tempted to look at a digital device. I'm going to be with people, or I'm going to be alone. I'm going to get some silence. And kind of going radio silent for the digital media is really critical for building your listening skill and creating the right kinds of environments around you where you can hear people and hear their stories. And it's good for mental health, but it's also good just for maintaining the proper relationship with this really powerful technological tool that we have. And so I do recommend those things. So start real conversations, even in the digital platform, and then also fast.
Well, and so as we kind of wrap up this episode, what I'd like to do is just quickly talk about, now there's 8 active listening skills that you mentioned.
Yep.
And we definitely don't have time to go through all of them. But
that kind of makes this a bit of a tease, Mike.
Well, hey, there's 8 of them, and I can list them out here. In fact, I might do that on my on the show notes. But out of these 8, which one can you drill down just a little bit into so that people listening will have something they could use as soon as the podcast is over, as soon as they walk into their world, as soon as they walk into their job, as soon as they get done with their commute? What is one of these skills that they could start using today that you feel would have the most value, would provide the highest return on investment for them?
Okay, so the answer for me, and this is why it's the first one that's mentioned in the book. This is the first one when I do training for hostage negotiators, because I train hostage negotiators, or when I do corporate training. It's the first one we address, because I think there's the greatest potential for value, and that is open-ended questions. So it's also the one we've mentioned a couple times in the podcast. So let's just do that one. That makes this a little less of a tease. So open-ended questions, I like to start with that because most people have been exposed to this concept that there's closed-ended questions and there's open-ended questions. And most people can clearly define what a closed-ended question is. It's a question that can be answered with one word or a very short answer. But then I ask, no, really, define what an open-ended question is. And it's a lot harder. They're like, well, it's one that doesn't, just take a short answer. I'm like, well, that's not a really good definition according to philosophy. So this is my definition for open-ended question. It's anything that you say or do that invites somebody to tell their story. And so we're talking about taking a deep dive into this sense of where they're at and where they want to go, right, and where they've been. So in general, questions that start with what or how or who or when or where, these are good. Usually these are good. And they invite people to share that aspect of the story. You'll notice I didn't really say why. Why can be really good, can be super powerful, but it's also really dangerous. In crisis, or when people don't have a strong sense of their relationship with you, if you start asking why questions, they may look at that as you questioning their motives and may set you back as a listener. So you can do it, but you have to sell it, that you really do want to know why, and you're not just basically accusing them of having false motives or maybe making bad decisions. So why's on the table, but be careful. But the idea here is I'm inviting you to tell the story in your own words, on your own terms. You will tell me what's important by how you choose your words and how you choose to unfold the story. But if I ask a bunch of rapid-fire, short answer questions, closed-ended questions, then I'm really, in a certain sense, I'm kind of telling my own story in the process of you trying to tell me yours. I'm chopping it up and I'm getting it on my terms, and I'm not going to build a relationship with you that way, and I'm not really going to learn anything that way because, as we already said, when I talk, I really don't learn. So that's the idea, but there's levels to it. And in the book, we kind of get into that where, okay, yeah, so if I said, hey, how's your day going? That's a great question, right? But the best use of the open-ended question technique is to really dive into the stuff that you really need to know as a leader to lead your organization well. So I'm going to propose this to your listeners of your podcast. Provided that you think you have created the environment where people will tell you the truth, go to 3 key people in your organization and ask this open-ended question. What is my reputation as a leader in this organization? You got to be ready for whatever they're going to tell you. And hopefully you've created the environment where they will tell you the truth, and the only thing that you can say once they've said whatever they're going to say is thank you. Do anything else, and you will shut the door to the truth for that person, at least as it goes to your reputation as a leader, forever. So you have to be, it's a risky, but you know what? Listening is risky and leadership's risky. But you have to be willing to ask those kind of, we call $1 million questions, because that's where you get a better handle on the obstacles and the opportunities that are facing your organization.
Well, and again, I'm looking at all these where you talk about any question that starts with what, who, where, how, or when is a good start. And I just keep thinking to somebody's going to listen to this, or they may be listening to it while they're engaging on Facebook or LinkedIn or their website or Instagram or whatever, trying to convert sales. I keep thinking it just goes back for me to say, hey, look, just because you're not face-to-face with somebody you're trying to engage with doesn't mean that you have to change anything. Like, try these things So say you're doing something on Instagram, you post whatever product you're trying to sell, but you're telling your own story, and somebody engages with you. Try some of these. Try the open-ended question, because
Yes,
that may have
100%.
a higher conversion than telling your own. In fact, it will. Well, I mean, we both know this. It will have a higher conversion than telling your product story, is letting them tell their stories. And we can do this on a Facebook post. We can do it on Instagram. We can do it on LinkedIn, where we can actually dive deeper using this open-ended question, so that we do engage with people and have an increased chance of influencing them through that medium.
I have people from time to time, they're like, this is great. Some of the people I need to listen to, they're not here. Like it's a long distance relationship, professionally or personally. And I tell them, like, have you ever really thought about what hostage negotiators do? Almost all of our business is done over the phone, on a throw phone or on a cellular connection. Like, we literally, it's so dangerous, we can't be face to face with the person. That's kind of by design. Now, some of our stuff is face to face, jumpers, or in extreme cases, when we have to go into a structure and go voice to voice down a hallway or something like that. But almost all of our work is done by phone, and increasingly now, messaging systems, whether that's SMS, MMS, or through social media. And what we know is all of the 8 active listening skills still apply, and they still have great value, provided that you faithfully apply them to this conversation and to this person's story. And so I 100% agree. You should start these conversations on social media, on Instagram, whatever. You can do it in the public posts or the comments, or you can do the DM or whatever, the messaging side of the house. But ask open-ended questions of these people that are engaging you on the content. If they like it, message them and say, hey, I saw you like this. What caused you to like this, this post or this picture or this product? And engage them. You can sell or you can tell. And the salesmen that approach me trying to tell me about their product and tell me why I need it, they don't get my money. But the people that ask me what I want and ask me about me and my needs, they consistently get my business. And so listening is the foundation of sales just as much as it's the foundation of hostage negotiation and human relationships.
Okay, well, I think that's a great place to kind of wrap up our episode. But before we do, you have me feeling a little bit bad about just kind of teasing people with the 8 active listening skills. Can we list those out real quick, just to give people a little bit of info on, hey, these are the 8 we're talking about. And then if you could just let us know, hey, how do we get in touch with you? Where do we get the book? That sort of thing. That'd be great.
Yeah, so let's just do this then. So we already said open-ended questions. There's minimal encouragers, right? This really speaks to the attentiveness side. It's like what we do with our body and even maybe our voice, the cues we send people that we're listening, right? There's open-ended questions, which we mentioned. There's reflecting, sometimes called mirroring, right? And this is a simple technique to get people to continue to tell the story once they've started. There is effective pauses, and these are a little bit more high risk, high reward. And this is designed to get people to continue to tell the story when they might be hesitant to, or to prevent us from injecting our own story or changing the direction of the story when we really should not, right? So there's also paraphrasing, and this is picking out the really important parts of the story to find out more and to demonstrate that we're listening, right? There's I messages. These are ways in conflict, especially, or in situations where somebody does something that's really great, like they're really sharing their story and giving us lots of insight to either, I would say, punish bad behavior, or at least cause people to retreat from bad behavior, or to reward really important milestones in a relationship or in a conversation. So those are I messages, right? Then there's emotion labeling. This is the money. Like for a customer service or dealing with people in crisis who are overly emotional, this is the most important one, I feel, is emotion labeling, right? And then summarizing. So summarizing is a super versatile active listening skill. You can do tons with summarizing, provided you do it properly and provided you've actually been listening. So I think that was 8. Did I get them all?
You did, and I'm cheating because I'm looking at your book. But yes, you got them all, which I would hope since you wrote the thing.
I did write it. Now I'm sitting in my living room with no. So I guess I passed your test, Mike.
You did.
You had asked about how to reach me. I mean, the first thing I would say is, hey, go buy the book, and you won't meet me physically, but you'll see what I'm selling. You'll see what I'm about. You'll see my mission in life and how I approach relationships with people and how important I think they are. And you can get that on Amazon. It's a Kindle ebook. It's an actual physical paperback, or you can get both in a bundle. And it's available Amazon.com. And the title again is Life or Death Listening. That'll get you there. Dan Oblinger.
Well, I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the show.
What's that, Mike?
I said I'd go ahead and put a link to that on my show notes and my website. So, hey, don't worry about it. Just go ahead and click on it. It'll take you right to Amazon. You can buy it there.
So that's great. And you'll give me a little bit of money, and, my kids will thank you. I've got 5 adopted children, and, that's how they eat. So no pressure, not trying to, tug at the heartstrings, but whatever. That's great. What I'd rather actually have, though, is a conversation with you out there in podcast land. And I'm sure you'll post those links as well, but email me is the best. If you email me any time of night, don't be surprised when you get a response. I don't sleep a lot. And then also on my LinkedIn, I share a lot of content. I give a lot of stuff away for free because truly I think this is a calling that I have. So I don't try to monetize everything. So get on there. I share stories of people I encounter in my kind of crazy journey and the listening opportunities that kind of unfold and what I've learned about them that I can share appropriately. And those tend to be fairly humorous. I think humor is an important part of adult education. And then also I share insights. I'm always working on some other content or training or keynote. So I share insights in my own journey of listening discovery. I'm not there yet. I'm still a work in progress. So yeah, LinkedIn, connect with me, check out my articles, and then email me. If you got a burning question, you want to know more, you feel cheated because you didn't get the other 7 active listening skills. I don't own those. They're on the internet. I had a unique approach to them after 20 years of my service, but they're there for you, and I'd be happy to be your tour guide.
Well, and so I will put links to both your LinkedIn profile and your email, and definitely your book. And I just wanted to really thank you for coming on the podcast, talking to us, because we've talked a lot on the podcast from hearing from different people about communication skills, about mindset, about consciousness, about all these things. But really, I think you're the first active listener focused guest we've had. And I got so much value out of this. I think everybody else did too. So I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast and having such a deep conversation with us about this.
Mike, it's my pleasure. And let's hope that the conversations continue.
Well, I definitely think they will. So all of those links will be in the show notes. And again, thanks to Dan Oblinger for coming on to the Crucial Talks podcast. I know I got a lot of benefit from this talk. And really, if you have a chance, please visit with me at www.crucialtalks.com. And you can connect with me on email, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Twitter. And if you need anything from me, feel free to just reach out however you wish, and I'll get in contact with you. Also, if you could please subscribe to the podcast and rate it, that would really help grow the audience of people interested in these conversations, just like the one we had with Dan. So have a great week, and remember, if we want to understand behavior, we need to understand what drives people.
Please review, share, and subscribe to the Crucial Talks podcast. Visit crucialtalks.com.